Good to go?
Yeah.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah,
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks, Ken. Good morning, everybody. The purpose of this workshop is to respond to some questions that were raised in previous workshop or meeting about our reserve management plans and sort of what guides them and what the state of our RMPs are currently. So I've got a little bit on the Reserves Act, not too much, and a bit on our team and what we do. So, and yeah, this is just a discussion, questions that are welcome through the discussion. Is there anyone online as well that I need to keep? No? Okay.
Barry, they got on there.
No.
Apology, John. Oh, that's very clever.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
So how do we manage reserves? The Parks Planning team acts under the guidance of the Reserves Act, and the Reserves Act requires reserves to be managed for public benefit. So that's a primary driver. The Reserves Act specifies the things including reserve classifications such as recreation, natural, scenic, historic classifications of reserves. It specifies things like leasing powers for how long and what reasons we can lease reserve land. It specifies things like infringements, such as it's unlawful to remove items from reserves. And it also specifies management planning. So under section 41 is management planning, and it outlines the timing of management plans when we're required to do them, notification processes that they must be available to the public for at least 2 months to provide comment, and also guidance under reviews, such as they must be under continuous review in order to adapt to circumstances or increased knowledge. The guidance note around that is that we should look to review them about every 10 years. That might not mean that anything needs to change, but they do need that review. And the Reserves Act talks about protecting, enhancing reserves, and it has this language that we use in all our parks comms that you might have noticed. So that's really taken directly from the Reserves Act about what the intention of those reserve management plans are. So what types of plans do we do? We do the RMPs, which is required by the Reserves Act, and that's the opportunity for the community to tell us how they want us to manage the reserve for them, and we're accountable to that. So other plans that we do are master plans and development plans, so things like their spatial plans. We do consult with them, with the public on those, and they're generally, again, aiming to be a long-term plan, looking far out into the future, and they always remain at quite a conceptual level. So it might be where toilets are located, but it doesn't come down to their orientation and colour and materials and that kind of thing. So yeah, both intended to be long-term plans. When we go out to the community for a vision for an RMP, we really want them to think 50 years into the future so that we can create those little steps towards creating the vision for that reserve. Then we do further engagement when we get to detailed design. So when we have budget to be able to implement some of the things that come out of these plans, that's when we go back to the community and we finalise construction details, plant palettes, materials, orientations of things at that stage. How do we use RMPs? The Parks Planning team would use them every single day. We use them to assess public requests that come to us, which are many and varied. So anything to do with property, maintenance, events, activities on the reserve, parking, all sorts of things, and they do help us prioritise the actions for our team, such as there might be a policy around having a bike network, so that's something that will come into our team as something that we have to put into our program to create a bike network. So, yeah, and recent examples of development plans would be, as compared to reserve management plans, would be Lismore Park and Peninsula Bay, and that's where that's guided areas of planting. It's been more spatial. Where are we going to have those areas of planting versus the overall sort of ecological policy that we might have for reserve, which would fit into an RMP. So where and how are new reserves coming to us? Land acquisition, for example, Mount Iron, that was a big recent one. They come at us from developer contributions. Developers are required to contribute through new land development, and that might come through as land as well as facilities on reserves. And then historically there have been donations as well, such as the Village Green. Very grateful for that one.
Stephanie, Christine,
Yeah.
I just want to move forward your slide there.
Oh, right.
Not there.
Holy hell.
Just in case you didn't know who we are.
No, we can go past that one.
Throw that one up a bit, please.
A recent success. Yeah, zoom in.
One of those.
So this
Thank
is
you.
where I'm at right now, the first page of, just discussing reserves acts and plans. So that final bullet point there, how do we prioritise plans? The kinds of things that we think about when we're prioritising plans are statutory requirements, the Reserves Act, any agreed resolutions or other commitments such as developer agreements, that kind of thing, any risks and benefits to the reserves, their character and their values, drivers such as political drivers, organisational drivers, commercial, population growth, density. So some recent examples would be sort of community drivers, getting playground put in at Burton Park. Then another recent example would be commercial drivers with hydro attack amendment to the RMP. Other ways, other factors that contribute to how we prioritise plans are the age of the plan as well, and requests from community elected members, complaints or other information that comes to us, and health and safety would always be a factor if something came to us in that way. Second, do you want to add anything to that? So how many plans do we have? So our district currently has 20 RMPs. Those are all available on the website. Those 20 RMPs, many of them cover multiple reserves. So there's Wanaka Lakefront Reserves, where that RMP covers several reserves. There's the Lake Hayes Estate Shotover Country Bridesdale Reserve Management Plan that covers all the reserves in that area, which is quite a lot of land area. Some of the exceptions would be our communities like Glenorchy, Kingston and Makarura. There's no RMPs in those areas currently, but some of those areas are changing, and so that would factor into some of the drivers. We also have the opportunity to do an omnibus RMP, so that would be a general set of policies for all our reserves that don't already have their own specific RMP, and that would be a way to help capture a lot of the new urban reserves that are coming to us as well, and sort of complete them in a combined effort, and would be quite effective. So our current plans, the 20 that we do have, range in age from 1984 is the oldest one, which is Ruby Island, and our most recent one, Ben Lomond Queenstown Hill Reserve Management Plan. Thanks for your help with that one. And we've completed another one this year, Mount Iron, for that new big reserve over there. And there are a few older ones that are from the 80s and 90s. We are still actively using them all the time, and for the most part they are serving us quite well because they were created with that long-term vision.
That's a question around that.
Yeah.
How do you review those long-term plans? Because every 10 years you've legally got to review them, or according to the Act?
It's the guidance, so it's not a legal requirement to do every 10 years, but they need to be under continuous review. So if we were using them and finding that they were no longer fit for purpose for us, they were causing issues or they weren't meeting the needs or expectations of the community, then they would need to be reviewed. We have done some amendments to reserves, particularly Queenstown Gardens has had a couple of amendments in the last decade to help meet the needs of that space. So those premier reserves come under a bit more pressure and need to be reviewed more often.
And sorry, a second question. Is there a database of, I know there's 20 reserves and it's online, but is there a database of when they were last reviewed or amended?
It says on the plan usually, the plan will be updated on the title page. It will say amended March 2021 or that kind of, and then you can see that amendment within the plan to that one policy. So that's the only way currently.
We also have them in our asset management plan, so they're all listed there with when they're written and their age and whether there's a review, like they said, they listed them in there.
Yep.
Yeah. So there is that database sitting behind. Yeah.
What plans are we working on currently? So we currently have just completed 2 big ones this year. We've got the Kowara Riverside Reserves that is coming to a future Community and Services Committee to notify the draft later this year. And Glenorchy Airport, that one's currently underway. Yeah. 10 years. Yeah.
Push it onto the next council somehow.
Don't do that to the staff, councillor. We've just celebrated one of our colleagues' 10-year anniversary. This project is given to them in the second week.
We should have beers and barbecues on the two-way street.
That's a good call.
And then development plan wise, we've had Jardine Park this year, and we've got Arrowtown and Widgeon underway, and then we've of course had some tree succession and forestry plans as well. How can the community drive or lead plans? You know, we try and be as thorough as we can with our engagement. We do find working with community associations really, really valuable when they, you know, package up the views of their community. That's really, really helpful. Plans that we might work on in the future include, like I mentioned, an omnibus reserve management plan, potentially the islands ones or some of the Ruby Island and Pigeon Island, which need a reserve management plan. Sunshine Bay to Frankton reserve management plan is very old currently. Wanaka Golf Course is another very old plan.
Glenorchy Eastern.
Yeah, Glenorchy Eastern, put that back on the agenda. Development plan wise, we've got ones like Kingston Lakefront could be one that's going to face some pressure with the development out there. And then I just want to explain about how plans fit into our overall work program. They're big projects that need a team around them, including comms, a lot of support from comms, support from governance, and have quite sort of, you know, extended timelines because of that public process. But probably 70% or more of our daily business as usual is providing input into consents, reserve landscape plan approvals from developers, community requests, many and varied and constant, managing relationships with reserve users, strategic input into organisational documents across QLDC, like the climate action plan or parking strategies, things like that. Parks always has to provide a lot of input into those plans. We really touch on a lot of other parts of the organisation. Reserve closure monitoring, signage and general parks comms. There's also the property aspect. We have to review and approve all new applications and existing renewals for leases, licences and permits, and things like building improvement approvals and managing the relationships with all those leaseholders. So yeah, if that's about 70%, 30% is this project side of things, and then there's also implementing these plans that we develop. So there's the project management people on our team who deliver things like the Hawea playground that we just saw. They would, implement things like Sunshine Bay erosion control, new toilets, many more things. Yeah.
Shopping list.
And then that's just the parks planning team. So we're one of 3 teams within parks. Yeah, I hope that helps a little bit with
Are there reserves that don't sit within any of these plans?
the current plans.
Yeah.
There are reserves out
And
there.
how are they
Yeah.
managed again? You probably said that already.
They're ones that don't come under much pressure. So, but we, like following the Reserves Act, try to manage them for the public benefit. Will the public benefit from this at large? That would be one of our questions that we'd ask ourselves. How does this reserve fit into the wider network of other reserves? Somebody requesting a playground and there's already one, 200 metres away or that kind of thing. So yeah, we have a sort of, I guess, a bit of an internal practice guide of a checklist of things that we would ask ourselves about a reserve. Yeah.
And that's where that omnibus that Christine spoke about, that's one piece we're looking at, which they have like in Christchurch and Auckland, which covers all the smaller reserves that don't have those pressures that could work. But at the moment, yeah, we use the Reserves Act as well. Like if someone wanted to lease the licensing, we'd just go through, revert back to the Reserves Act and what's there.
So the examples I'm thinking of is Fernhill communities obviously getting really active around the reserve at the bottom of Sunshine Bay, as well as the one up the top called Fernhill Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
So would sit under one of these reserve management plans, I assume, and so that would be what we're talking about?
Yeah, and that's where we're working on a development plan for the reserve at the base. That's where we've suggested to the community that would be the best way forward to work out a spatial.
So it's just sort of a conversation with that community association and work out best approach.
It depends on what the pressures are for the site. Like with that one there, because it was more spatial community activities within the reserve, it was, we think, great, a spatial plan where people can pick up and then maybe implement some of those actions within the plan is more suitable than your reserve management plan, which has your policies and objectives at that high level. Some of reserves have both, but sometimes there may be a need just for one rather than the other.
Can I just So I was just going to add that. So is that your question?
Yep.
So I would think of there'll be drivers for a reserve management plan. There might be pressures or development or a whole range of things. And you use the term, you heard me use the term, it's a handshake with the community. And so that's what the reserve management is. It's kind of a handshake about how you're going to manage that area. When there's no reserve management plan, you will default back to those other policies that are sitting around the organisation that do policies.
And actually, Dave, that's a good way to outline what Christine was saying, because coming back to your point, there's future growth. Obviously, we're a high growth area. And, you know, it's also the integrity of some of the green infrastructure that we need to make sure is connecting those communities. And obviously the track and trail network is often one that we get presented with the opportunity, but there's quite a bit that goes with that. And then the other element with that planning too is we've made sure the team in the last period has actually been resourced to manage a really comprehensive work program. And it's an ongoing challenge. But, you know, Christine and Brianna have been working really hard to make sure that they're not just triaging matters, trying to get on the front foot. And we've certainly seen that in the last 18 months with some calibre responses. You know, the RMP from Mount Iron is actually a brand new document. So it's not often an opportunity to do that on that scale as a planner. And actually that experience has given us a blueprint to work alongside the likes of Simon and the back there and Dave and others around how we also take forward things like Valentine Road and other bigger pieces of, you know, green infrastructure or open space infrastructure. So we've certainly started to gain a lot, but one of the things the team have got very good at is also put things away tidy. The 77, you know, Reserve Act is very prescriptive, so there's just steps you can do and you can't do, and it's really well prescribed, which is what Dave's alluding to too, because when you have that handshake with the community, there are some elements we just cannot change because this is what's set out in the intent of that 77 Act.
Out of interest, it's the Reserves Act is knocking on 50 years old now. Has it gone through a lot of changes in that 50 years, or like the Local Government Act has?
It does get amendments from time to time. Things like the infringements get updated from time to time.
But not as much as, say, other acts might.
Not as much as the other acts. I think it serves us relatively well, and maybe that's why it is a long-standing act. Yeah.
50 years.
Yeah.
And it's a good.
There's an older, the Wildlife Act, 1953.
Yeah.
Just looking at that.
Yeah.
Is that the oldest one?
I don't know, but there'll be older ones, I'm sure. But
It's a good point you raise though, because we've often thought about that, but actually you look at it, like Christine said, they make amendments.
Yeah.
But, you know, Dave and I have had conversations recently with community, you know, that they look at a green space and then people obviously have varying visions to, you know, what they need in their communities. And often even just the simplest things we come under a lot of pressure for is the team are always presented with parking options. You know, and we've probably found ourselves administering more parks through that channel with Christine and Brianna than what we probably had through the roading team. You know, in terms of what we've moved the dial on, you go to the Monica waterfront, we've now got purposeful parking as part of that reserve setting. So, you know, those small elements actually can take up a lot of the team's time, and that act actually assists in clarity with both parties about what you can and cannot do.
And in terms of commercial activities on reserves, and I'm just mindful of all this discussion around rapid transport options, potentially on Queenstown Hill. I mean, what's your take on how you actually achieve a commercial operation on a reserve? I can't imagine that would be an easy thing to push through with the Reserve Act.
How about I set a scene and then these three can answer your question.
I'm not sure what my question was.
But actually, so, and rightly, it should be a challenging domain, because one of the points that was, I should have finished out, Dave and I, you know, how often do you stand at or enjoy a park bench on a piece of reserve and it's just fulfilled its intent? It's actually just nice just to sit there, right? And you walk through with your dog or play with your kids. But we have many examples where we've been able to integrate that commercial aspiration as well as to some good public use outcomes. And, you know, we're sitting below one with the Skyline, obviously. And there's many examples this team has had to work alongside that. And where you see it done well is when you're working with agencies that have a long-term aspiration, vision. Yes, there's a commercial element, but they understand the importance of the environment that's part of that makeup and how you do business.
The commercial element usually under the Reserves Act has to support and benefit the reserve, like help allow people to access that reserve and enjoy the benefits of the reserve is one of the requirements. And then I guess we've got that very public process with the Reserves Act as well, where people can comment on that. And I think something we're always thinking of is there are so many different types of activities and users who want to use a reserve. You know, how can we like Kim was saying, make that work for everybody, or not displace those people who do just want to enjoy the serenity.
Serenity.
Yeah.
If I can ask a question, the omnibus idea and all the little urban reserves, because I'm guessing in Narrowtown we've got a lot of them, right? We've got like the Four Square, Rose Douglas, all those little winding walkways. Would they be
covered already in the reserve management?
are they all captured into one?
They're in an Arrowtown omnibus reserve management plan, which is
That was the Arrowtown omnibus review.
In its own little.
I don't have
It doesn't say, please
Look
don't,
at the front of the book.
yeah, does it now say, please don't chuck out any old signs?
Yeah.
And then, we're very attached to our old signs in Arrowtown. But that made me then think too of how do we prioritise, when we've got lots of little bits like that, how do you prioritise those urban reserves of those uses? And one comment that's sitting in mind at the moment is I read in a Wanaka Facebook comment the other day about a lady who was asking for upgrades in our cemeteries because going to grieve when there's no benches or trees or shelter, and she was literally sitting behind another gravestone to sort of have some privacy and some time. And that, how do we sort of, when we've got so many of these different little places, how do we go, well, actually that to me sounds like a really a big one. How do we make our cemeteries places where people can go?
Probably a number of ways to answer that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Oh, would you like to have a ready to go, Dave?
So I was sort of thinking, there's probably quite a number of ways to answer that. So I guess the idea of the Reserves Act is to provide reserves and protect those spaces. And they do it in a very statutory sense. Okay, it's quite rigid and statutory. Reserve, and you can have reserve management plans that sit under that, which kind of determine how that particular reserve is going to be managed. And that's where you do community consultation, and that's where you kind of work out, decide how you're going to manage that reserve. You've got a period of time, and that changes. So, so if you want to do development of the plan, that's going to kind of align with those community expectations that are set in that plan. That guides you, and so depending on the requests that come in, commercial request, if the plan says no, you can't do commercial. That's what guides you. So if there's a door open, it can guide you.
That's where we see
But
some of
in terms
those quick ones and fast turnarounds where someone might come to you and go, can we put in a bike crack at the one by the
So depending on the request, whether it's a commercial thing, which is quite a significant request, or just if you want to put a seat in, you might be able to go, that's fine. And so in terms of the cemetery, if I didn't see that Facebook post, but if they're just wanting some seats in the cemetery, I'd say that's aligned and everyone's pretty, that's not a significant thing. If they want to build something else that's really out of
a temple,
that's a different discussion, So there's plenty of
different levels of, so we should be encouraging those small requests to just keep coming through as requests.
And we work with it.
It might be within the omnibus already that could be delivered.
And so even a small group request might have to align with some requirements about how you determine that's going to be managed.
I think, Dave, you've illustrated it well, because Lisa, one of the things the team are very good at is actually just explaining this is a process.
Yeah.
So you might have an individual requirement or an option that you'd like to see occur, but triggers beyond what's captured in these plans, we then make sure we follow the process. Might be back at this table, or could be back at the community board, and we've daylighted that, and mostly supportive when I think about those sort of small amenity improvements across the wider network. A couple of things just to note too, it comes back to Matt's question about how many plans do we have in that omnibus approach. The team are responsible for the management of 2,500 hectares, and as Christine's alluded to, some of that's really high profile, world class, and then some of it's back country. We allow a couple of goats to graze on, and we go from everything in between. But so, there's that constant tension, and resources are an obvious one as well. And then in amongst it, as Matt touched on, we've got fast track coming at us, and Diana and Christine and Dave work alongside Jeannie, who's overseeing our blue-green network, so we're also looking at that bigger strategic piece about how we actually grow and preserve some of the spaces and places that will be needed for future communities that we're not even currently constructing.
Question, in terms of development contributions, are you seeing a trend in developers developing their own things more often, like doing it themselves, or reserves being fragmented, or any sort of commonalities between the reserves contributions and development contribution?
Often developers do the development and install the playground or facilities or toilets themselves, and that can work really well. We've got a process internally where we call the Design Challenge Group, where those plans that the developers want to do, they do need to be approved by us, and we ensure that the right subject matter experts are around the table and look at that, and make sure it meets with our disability policy, access to the reserve, so the P&I roading team would have a look at it, check it's not going to get in the way of any other infrastructure or uses on the reserve, and the maintenance team looks at it as well, make sure it's something that we are willing to take on as a parks asset and maintain.
So that's kind of into like, but they also, the developers can drive the ideas a little bit. They'll have their plan and they'll have their vision. Yeah. And so this is what Christine's talking about. They'll have that and they'll bring that to the team.
Yeah.
The idea is often coming from them, but they'll bring it to the team and they'll feed it back, so it goes back and meets.
And it goes both ways as well. We might say, I think this area needs a court or a half court, or that kind of thing would be a priority to put on that reserve within your development.
So I think we need to break that down just because there's reserve contributions and reserve improvements. So reserve contributions is where the developer will sometimes give us land.
Right.
And then, or they'll give us contributions and then we have to, through an acquisition strategy that we don't have, purchase land. And then there's the improvements, which Christine is talking about. So talking about the land that they give us.
Yeah. And I guess by nuance, if the developer decides to do either reserve contribution or like financial contribution to reserves, is there a timeline for council to deliver something for that community, given that investment? I'm just thinking of like some developments, right, that they've given land or they've given money, but there hasn't been a park or a sort of thing established for a long time.
There's been issues with that in the past, and I think the team working quite hard to we've learned a lot over what you're talking about there, some real legacy things that have taken around, and we're living with those. The team have got quite smart at trying to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, I was going to, that's the question. What are some of the things that you're thinking of in order to avoid that?
So yes, I think that's where Christine was saying about the improvements. Some developments, the developer will give us the land and the improvements, and there's some really great examples of like out at Henley's with that. And then other areas we're not getting that. So that's where we are now looking at planning processes to get ahead, where we need an acquisition strategy where we can purchase some sections, and then it's looking at using the Reserve Improvement Fund to put something on there. But it's still...
So probably one thing that's changed, we're trying to get in much earlier in the development.
And give it a sort of the leverage it needs in order to make sure that it's going to be delivered.
So one of the things is acquiring the right type of land in the right location. Often they'll be trying to gift us some land that's not necessarily suitable from a developer's perspective, but not suitable from us. And so we've got a few legacy things like that. So we're looking to get in early, acquire land and install maybe do development at the same time.
Yeah, a lot of work before a best team report comes to the committee. A lot of work goes into trying to acquire the best reserve land and appropriate sized reserve land for the community that we can.
And do you feel like you have enough leverage in order to ensure that process doesn't have to fall ill to the same consequence of previous?
Probably getting into developer agreements and that kind of space.
That evolution.
Yeah, there's a bit of work to be done there, because at the moment, I think if we are given land and then to put the improvements on outside of that, it has to go through the LTP process.
Yeah.
And sometimes that may not be weighted with health and safety and all other things, so it drops off, so that reserve gets nothing. So that's where, as Dave said, we're trying to change that. But yeah, it's sort of,
And more and more so developers are motivated to put in the improvements themselves so that it doesn't get lost in the council.
And
Yeah,
routine
and you're creating
process.
that community, right?
Yeah.
And the services go with it. I mean, it's a small thing, but even with the change to medium high density, it's becoming really hard to put mature trees in. You know, you can put them in small, and you know, Steph can talk to this, but how often we are now being presented, so she's gone.
Yeah.
How often we've been presented with requests, you know, 5-10 years on, you've got these maturing trees that are growing that, you know, the blue chip green look everyone wants, but actually it's blocked out of view, it's whatever, you know, so there's a lot that goes with the question you've asked, and we're certainly working, as Tim pointed out, to mature the thinking and join the dots.
Yeah.
Are you trying to, you've asked kind of a couple of questions there,
Yeah.
What are you trying to understand?
Oh, I mean,
You're just trying to understand.
yeah, I'm trying to understand. I mean, it feels like the right opportunity. No, like I was just thinking more in terms of like in Timsfield where we are, there was always a promise of a park. And I see it's a big dirt pile and it still has been. And then I go, what is the process for that evolving? Is that under the developer? Is that under us? And I was thinking, you know, it's always really simple and straightforward when the developer is motivated to see through that vision the whole way through. But then I was just thinking back around where does the onus sit with that and how do we deliver it? So it was a bit of that thinking where, like you've said, identifying some of the past mistakes that have caused a lack of that, you know, integration in subdivisions.
So Simon's just stood up, because actually Simon's actually been working with a group to look at this exact question.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say. So essentially, there's 3 work streams going on at the moment. One's looking at the housing building capacity model.
Yeah.
One's looking at development agreements across council and digging up all sorts of lovely things that we're planning around our development agreements, but basically trying to collect them all in one place so we actually know what the developers' obligations were, what council's obligations were, and also then looking at how do we move forward with developers, ensuring that we get everything we're just talking about here, and the best, you know, we get good land, or we get, you know, alternatively we get cash in lieu of land, make sure we get community facility improvements, all those type of things. So we're really trying to get to a point where we have one view of how we work with developers and development agreements. And then there's a third stream of work that's around development contribution. So where the government has made some changes in that space.
Yeah.
So they're looking at that and saying, okay, let's get a really good handle on what our development contributions are looking like moving forward into the future, and how we're going to look at, you know, future growth and planning and all those sort of things. So there is quite a bit of work. There's a lot of paddling going on underneath, trying to basically get us into a position where we have a very clear, I guess, stance from a council perspective around how we work with developers. So it's not just, you know, somebody picking up parks and picking up property infrastructure or whatever else, but actually one organisation view of what we do.
That's really helpful, and I think as well, just like highlighting the fact that even politically, if there is sort of a, you know, set aside, okay, well, this community is owed this or whatever, you know, like there is an aspect of connecting some of the funding to where that investment relays back into, so it's not as, you know, flippant when it comes to debating it around the
And it's that third stream that Simon's pointing out, the government's changed to make sure that it's a clear line of sight with that investment, your timing, and it's what Dave and the team have covered.
Yeah, and I can give you an example right now, a live example. Obviously, we've got with Homestead Bay, RCL, we've been kind of, you know, from my side, we've been working around community facilities. We're also working them around dealing with parks and reserves, making sure we're getting enough that we need. And so we're kind of trying to work together to ensure we get the best outcome for the community, the future community in that space. And then, of course, we're looking and saying, okay, we're going to get a whole bunch of development contributions out of that. What does that mean as well?
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of work in that space that we're trying to, you know, just get ahead of the game as much as possible. But yeah, sometimes we find that we are picking up legacy issues as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes those agreements that were made before our time, they actually favour a developer, not the community that currently lives there. So there's a little bit of tension in that space, but certainly we're trying to get on the front foot more than being reactive around some of this.
And then even from the parks planning team, like our park strategy, you know, since 2020, like has come a long way to strengthen what we're getting. And then when developers come to us, we're tying it to the first stage that they have to give the reserves rather than a later stage, which is, you know, what you may be experiencing there.
Yeah.
So that we are putting other mechanisms in place as well when we're dealing with them.
No, I mean, I get an overwhelming sense that you're very acute to the issue and that is obviously something that.
It's about creating communities that we do want to live in, right?
Oh, exactly, yeah, sure.
5 powerful slides created quite the conversation, Christine.
Were you not expecting that?
Of course. Thank you for your time and thanks for following up on the questions that the committee have previously asked around this whole planning cycle. And I'll be pleased to know that, like you pointed out, there's plans coming back on the 16th of September. Conversation points.
People coming, and if any follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Are we still sharing?
I don't know.
John, can you stop the sharing or who's got the control? Or it might be Christine.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Thank you both. Oh, thank all three.